There is no freedom of information in Equatorial Guinea. There is no freedom of the press in Equatorial Guinea. There is one radio and TV station owned by the government, which only publishes information that is positive about the government. So it's basically a propaganda machine. And there is one radio and TV station owned by the son of the president, which basically produces information that is positive about the son. And that's it. We know that CPDS, Convergence for Social Democracy, the political party in the opposition with more support inside the country, at one point tried acquire the equipment to open its own radio station so it could reach the people. Within a day of that being known, the military went to their offices and destroyed the whole office looking for that radio station. They couldn't find it, so right now nobody knows where that piece of equipment is. Equatorial Guinea, in terms of news, is very isolated from the rest of Africa. It's the only Spanish-speaking country in sub-Saharan Africa. So information coming from Cameroon, Gabon, or information produced in Cameroon, Gabon, Chad, Central African Republic, and neighboring countries doesn't get into EG and doesn't have any impact because it's in French and people inside Equatorial Guinea speak Spanish. There are no newspapers produced in Equatorial Guinea. You couldn't go out to the street and buy a magazine or a paper. There are no bookstores in Equatorial Guinea, so you couldn't go out and buy a book written by an Equatorial Guinean writer in Madrid or inside the country. The only two spaces right now where if you're a citizen inside the country, you can go and get some information other than what the government wants you to have is at the Spanish Cultural Center or at the French Cultural Center. We are still pushing the U.S. Embassy in the country, or the U.S. Ambassador and State Department to open a U.S. Cultural Center, to open a democracy center rather. We know that the U.S. has done this in other African countries, a democracy center, a center where people could go, use a computer, find out what's happening outside, and interact with members of civil society, other people doing other work outside the country. Sadly, that hasn't happened yet. I have been pushing the State Department to think about how we could have Voice of America use a close by relay station to broadcast in Spanish into Equatorial Guinea. Sadly, that hasn't happened yet. I should say that over the last few years, as oil has become an issue in EG, it has gotten some coverage in the US. There are a few key journalists, people like Ken Silverstein, people like Peter Maas and others who periodically have written about the corrosive system that we have in Equatorial Guinea. And that is beginning to make its waves and reaching out to other people. The Pulitzer Center, also based in Washington, D.C., recently sent in a journalist because Equatorial Guinea hosted the Cup of African Nations. And as a result of these journalists going in and coming out with photos and material, some news is getting out. So little by little, news is getting out, and the U.S. is being a friendly ally in that process. But it's still a very closed society. Center for the Committee to Protect Journalists still lists Equatorial Guinea, I believe, as the third or fourth most closed society where you don't have independent media.